Hello, listeners. It's Gunter here with some exciting news. We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspired Change with Gunter. If your organization cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self development, and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspired Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number one in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spiegner Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. I'm your host. I saw a recent article in The Conversation, a really good and useful and persuasive piece of media. The article referred to a study of 600,000 college grads, and they concluded that it does make them better thinkers. Now, who would have thunk that? In this particular Facebook posting, a Facebook friend of mine very beautifully and persuasively, I keep coming back to that word, suggested that her avoidance of statistics led her to studying philosophy, and she was, well, seems to be forever grateful for that. Now, unfortunately, not everybody thinks that. There is an absolute assault on the supposed uselessness of studying philosophy. And I find that very narrow-minded and a bit disturbing and in some ways distressing, because ultimately all things come down to thinking. So the proposition that I'm going to put forward today in this podcast is that thinking precedes doing, and therefore philosophy precedes science. Now, that may sound just like a little clever slogan, but I want to argue that it's completely and absolutely true. And not just historically, not just in the sense that ancient philosophy gave birth to modern science, but in a much deeper and more personal sense. Science always rests on thinking. And thinking, when it becomes rigorous and critical, is philosophy. Now, I have a very smart friend, and for whatever reason, this whole truth seems to escape him. He premises that science supersedes philosophy. Well, sometimes we can sway people and at other times we can't. Perhaps he'll see the truth at some point in the future. Anyway, welcome back to Inspired Change with Gunter. That's me. And I want today to explore that whole premise. Now, I know it might sound a bit abstract, but on reflection, everything has to do with how we live and grow as human beings. And one of those characteristics that makes us human is thinking, at least for some of us, because some of us simply seem to absorb information and think that that's where it stops. Others try to bend information to suit their own argument. So let me come back to thinking before doing. So when we sit down and reflect on this, every action begins with thought. Now, some of that thought's very conscious, but sometimes thoughts are more in the subconscious realm, and sometimes some of that thought is mixed with the experience, the somatic experience within the realm of the unconscious. If you decide to pick up a glass of water, there's already a massive chain of thinking involved. I'm thirsty, that's water, this will quench my thirst. Thinking frames the doing. Now scale it up. Science is a form of doing. It's one of humanity's most powerful ways of engaging the world. But science, and this is really, really important, is not random doing. It's actually structured, methodical, and disciplined. That means science needs a framework. What are we trying to know? How do we test it? And what counts as evidence? These are not scientific questions. They're philosophical questions. So in the simplest sense, science cannot even get off the ground without philosophy. Philosophy acts as the architect of method. When I was at university, I studied the philosophy of science and especially the philosophy of biology. And it was out of that this became the real truth in our inquisitiveness. So, to think about things in the scientific method, we have observation, hypothesis, experiment, and conclusion. So, how does that work? Well, it might work a little bit like this. I'm a 5-year-old and I see the dog and I go, oh, I wonder what would happen if I tease said dog. Now, my hypothesis might simply be nothing. I can tease the dog and nothing will happen. Now then, I'll put that into action, and lo and behold, the dog bites me. This leads me to the conclusion from my experiment that if I tease the dog's going to bite me. Now, some kids are really quick on the uptake, and they'll never tease the dog again. Some kids need to repeat the experiment, and the philosophy of science, that's replicability, and lo and behold, the dog more than likely is to bite again. So the question is, where did that sort of process come from? Now, the interesting thing is no one actually tripped over this in a lab, in a white coat. This process was developed over centuries of philosophical reflection. Aristotle, Bacon, Descartes, Kant, Popper, they all wrestled with the question about knowledge, truth, and error, epistemology. Out of that came the practices we now call science. And even today, when a scientist designs an experiment, they are making philosophical decisions. What counts as a valid test? What variables matter? How to interpret the results? Science is just not about collecting data. It is data interpreted through thought. So here's the important bit too, and that is that data needs meaning. Imagine this. A thermometer reading 25. What does that mean? Well, the interesting thing is that in some respects, without a framework, it means bugger all. But because we have a thing that is attached to the thermometer which reads thermometer, I can go, thermometers measure temperature. So we've created already a conceptual framework that interprets that number. Without the philosophy of what temperature is, i.e. molecular motion, those numbers are just marks on a scale. And even that scale is not necessarily immediately transparent in its meaning. So this is true in every field, whether that's neuroscience, physics, social science surveys. All of them need philosophy to turn measurement into meaning. Now, there's a human parallel in all of this, and the three areas that I'm going to talk about is awareness, reflection, and contemplation. So I want to connect this really into human experience, which a lot of people don't seem to want to do, either intentionally or they just haven't thought it through, and they see philosophy as something completely abstract and useless. That sort of thinking is fundamentally useless. So, what's awareness is our immediate contact with life. I see, I feel, I notice. And reflection is the act of stepping back and asking, well, what does this mean? Why did I feel that way? What patterns are here? And contemplation goes even further. It asks, what is the deepest significance of this? What values guide me? What truth am I living into? Now, this is exactly the relationship between science and philosophy. Science is like awareness. It gathers information, measures, it observes. But without reflection and contemplation, that is, without philosophy, it will not become wisdom. And unfortunately, in our current world, wisdom seems to be short on supply. Now, in our personal lives, we often make the mistake that we think awareness is understanding. I can be aware that I'm angry, but without reflection, I don't know why. Without contemplation, I don't see what the anger is pointing to in my deeper sense of self. So just as philosophy precedes science, reflection and contemplation precede meaningful being and action. Without that, we don't really have any meaningful around this. Now, there's some historical lessons around all of this, and if we look back in history, we can actually see this pattern. Aristotle's natural philosophy was a combination of observation and reflection. Newton's laws weren't just measurements. They were framed by the philosophical belief that the universe is orderly and governed by causality. Even modern quantum mechanics raises questions that are as much philosophical as scientific. Is it really deterministic? Does the observer shape the observed? Now, what this shows us is that whenever humanity pushes forward in science, philosophy is already there, setting the stage, opening up the windows to what we can see. And in everyday life, well, what does that mean in everyday life? What does it mean for us here and now? Well, it means that our doing, our actions, our choices, our habits always rest on thinking, whether we realize it or not. If our thinking is shallow, our doing will become reactive. However, if our thinking is reflective, critical, and contemplative, then our actions become intentional. And so this is the practice of self-development. Just as science requires philosophy, our personal growth requires reflection. Without it, we're like scientists collecting data without interpretation. We move, but we don't understand. So bringing it back to inspired change, well, the point is not to separate philosophy and science, or thinking and doing. It's not an either or. proposition. It's an and also, like in many cases, most things in the universe. The fact is to recognize their relationship. Philosophy does not float above life, disconnected. It grounds life. It grounds us into the questions, what are we doing, why, and towards what end? My 8-year-old grandson and us were having a discussion around the table, and it was about, science fiction and science and so on. And he asked, just out of the blue, is it even necessary to have rockets? I thought that was pretty spectacular for an 8-year-old. Usually most 8-year-old goes, yeah, let's build them. Let's get into it. It'll be awesome. But he asked a very, very important question that we should be asking a lot more. Just because I can do something, should we do it? If we neglect philosophy, whether in science or in our personal lives, we risk becoming technicians of existence, clever with tools, but blind to meaning. If we embrace philosophy, then science becomes wisdom and action becomes transformational. So when we say thinking precedes doing, therefore philosophy precedes science, I'm not just describing history. I'm describing the very structure of human growth. Awareness gives us information. Reflection gives us understanding. Contemplation gives us direction, morally and ethically. And then action can be meaningful. So here's the takeaway. And we need to send this into the ether as much as possible, because universities are pressured to give up the very courses that are based on philosophy. So here's the takeaway. We should not skip philosophy. Whether you're a scientist in a lab or someone trying to live a better life, your doing will only be as deep as your thinking. Philosophy does precede science. Reflection precedes action. And contemplation precedes change. So on that note, thanks for joining me today on Inspired Change. Until next time, stay reflective, stay aware, and keep asking the deeper questions that make life worth living. And you'll join, whether you like it or not, the ranks of the philosopher.
Greetings to all our listeners. This week, we have a very exciting shout out. Our gratitude goes out to those of you listening in Ireland, as we've watched you hover at the bottom 20 for quite some time and recently watched you climb to number 8. We want to thank the listeners in Ireland as you brought your country to the top 5 global listeners list. Yes, number 5. Congratulations! We thank you for tuning in and promoting positive social change. This makes you a part of Gunter's efforts in transforming not only men's lives, but lives in general, and we are grateful you have joined us. I, DeVonna Prinzi, the co-executive producer, and our showrunner, Miranda Spigner-Sapone, sincerely thank you and ask that you please take the time to like, follow, subscribe, and share, as your efforts make a difference to everyone here at Inspire Change with Gunter. Please remember, if you want to share your story of social change, feel free to reach out to the show directly. Please see the show notes for our contact information. As always, thank you for each and every one of our listeners. But most importantly, keep inspiring positive social change.
Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.